Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from. Hope everybody is doing well and staying safe. My name is Bastian, and I am part of the project team at Asia Pacific Rail. We are very excited for today's panel discussion, where we are collaborating with Hexagon to discuss the topic of building the future of transportation infrastructure. The discussion will be led by Sybil Tan, who is the Director of Asset Management and Infratech at PwC. Before I hand over the session to her, I would like to remind you that this is an interactive webinar where you can ask questions throughout the discussion. To do so, please use the Q&A button that you find in your Zoom interface. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the session to Sybil and the panelists. Sybil, over to you.
Thank you, Bastian. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. I don't know where you're getting us from, but I guess this is a new way of working now. So before I actually start on this panel, thank you for joining us. It will be a very interesting, actually a very big topic that we're trying to embark on today. Let me just do a quick introduction for myself. My name is Sybil. I'm based in Singapore. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, working in both UK and Singapore. I'm currently in PwC leading the asset management and infratech business. And what we found as an engineer was that as the years go by, people keep building new things. And what they've realized is that you have to stop at some point and realize that you have to integrate the facilities management, the O&M part, into the integration of building. And that's where I think my new frontier comes in asset management and infratech. And in the history of engineering, I've actually done quite a bit with Network Rail in UK, and also as a design and contractor engineer. So with me today, I've got three very, very experienced guests in the industry. David Starbuck, who is a technical director in WSP. I've got Cameron Mills, who is the director in project controls for Victoria Government. And I've got Jimmy Crowell, who is a consultant in Hexagon, who does a lot of the implementation for software and hardware systems. So maybe just for starters, guys, I could get you to introduce yourself. Maybe starting off with Jimmy.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jimmy Kroll. I'm an industry consultant with Hexagon. I'm based out of Singapore, and I help companies in the Asia Pacific region evaluate their project management systems and processes to see if there are any opportunities for improvements.
Thank you. Followed by Cameron.
Hello, my name's Cameron Mills. I'm the Director of Project Controls on the Northeast Link project. I'm part of the Victorian Government Big Build initiative. It's the largest civil infrastructure project undertaken in the state of Victoria to date.
Thank you, Cameron. And David.
Hi there, and good day all. I'm David Starbuck, then Technical Director Rail with WSP, currently based in Malaysia, but involved in projects all over the globe, which is one thing about the large consultancy companies these days. Even though we're sitting at home, we're involved in all over the world, I think. So I've had 47 years now in rail industry, first 30 years in operations and maintenance, and the last 15 years or so in planning, design, and construction of new railways.
Thank you all. Now, before we start, I think just to reiterate that if you've got any questions for panels, for myself, please put them onto the Q&A chat, and I'll pick them up as and when we go along. If it's relevant to the topic that we are discussing at the point, I'll bring it up to the panelists as well. If not, then we'll try and answer them at the end of the panel discussion. And please do feel free to ask all the questions that you've got. We've got quite a range of experience here today. We've got people in systems, we've got hardware, software, we've got people in infrastructure, delivery, building, O&M, and consulting as well. So please do send your questions in. So guys, building the future for transport infrastructure, I think that is a huge topic to discuss today. Just for starters, from my experience in the last few years, definitely COVID in the last 2 years has changed a lot of the way that we've shifted the way of working. To be honest, otherwise we wouldn't be able to do this at the moment with Jimmy in US, David in Malaysia, myself in Singapore, and then Cameron in Melbourne. So it's kind of the lead into where things are going at the moment. So from the experience that I've got so far is two major trends that I would like to highlight is that what I've seen is that a totally new way of working now. The collaboration aspect has brought on brought to the frontier of so much of the discussions. And this was not rocket science before, but I think it's kind of highlighted by all this, the border controls and all the COVID controls that we are having to do now. And also the other point that I've noticed as well is when we do the design and build, or even at the planning stages for infrastructure in transport, the O&M aspect or the maintenance costs are now being discussed right at the start in a lot of the builds that I've been discussing, a lot of the stakeholders that I've been in talks with as well, because what we've realized is that the O&M costs and all the technology integration actually put on a lot of costs, even more than the initial build stages. So how much do we need to put aside for the next 40 years after the first 5-10 years of build? I think that is the new thing that I've noticed from me talking to some of my stakeholders. So guys, any insights or trends that you'd like to share just for starters before the questions start coming in? Jimmy, you want to start going?
Sure, I'll start. Since you mentioned two trends, I'll follow up with two more trends myself. So the first one is, I think COVID has accelerated the modernization of companies, tools, and processes, both in the field and in the office. So I think there was a reliance. Some companies realized that they were too reliant on in-office, whether that's paper documented processes or certain machines that were not connected to the cloud, those kind of things. Now that a lot of the office work, or almost all of it, is remote, that shift has completely accelerated. And so the companies that were prepared for it have done quite well. And now the pandemic has been long enough where a lot of companies have stepped up and made that shift. And when you're looking in the field, the same kind of modernizations are taking place to deal with the impact of the pandemic. So things like testing masks for workers during their lunch break to ensure their safety, using Bluetooth technology that already existed to monitor safe working distances. So these kind of new things that we need to be aware of. That's been one trend. And then another trend I've seen is just the resilience of people, whether it's project team members, really anyone that's involved in these infrastructure projects, just the resilience to continue and get the job done. So I think we were all knocked on our feet for weeks, a few months in the early stages. But I think now we've kind of gotten in the groove of things. Like you mentioned, Sybil, the new normal of operating. So I think we've proven as a species our resilience to get the job done.
Thank you. Indeed, I think we see things in a very different light at the moment as well. Cameron, David, do you want to?
I was just going to sort of follow on from that a little bit about the idea of how COVID has changed the way we work, because I'm working on projects in different countries. In one sense, it's made things a lot better. We collaborate a lot more now. We used to fly out once a month, perhaps, and meet and discuss the project. Now we collaborate every few days almost. So I think we can get progress more iterative, more collaboratively, the way we work now. But there's also the problem that I think the time zone is not taken into account as well. People expect you to be available to support meetings almost 24 hours a day, because now that they think you can just click and you're working from home, you're always going to be available. So I find there's a bit of a downside to that as well. So there's some great things come out of the rush to digitalization and communication, but also the expectation that people are going to be available at any time to attend a meeting to support the local time zone is perhaps something that we need to think about.
Yeah, indeed. Cameron, do you have anything to add to that as well?
I think I can just reiterate everyone's comments. I think to Jimmy's point, I think what's happened is the world's gotten a lot smaller now with the advent of technology and the ability for us to work anywhere and remotely. It's certainly opened up the whole globe. And to David's point, that brings a lot of positives and negatives, you know. So I've found that, you know, when we started off being locked down with the pandemic, that I found myself being immensely more productive because you were, you know, not having to travel in and out of to the office. You weren't having to physically attend meetings. I found majority of meetings started on time, they ended on time. There was a lot less conversation and banter and wasted time. So I found it immensely productive. But to David's point there, you're also finding your demands are higher now because people think they can just click a button and reach you no matter where and when. And the funny thing is, if you live where I live, which is the world record for lockdown in Melbourne, Victoria, if you're not at home, there's questions to be asked. Why aren't you at home? So, so no, that's the thing. I think there's been some immense positives with, you know, advancement in technologies and organizations being forced to adapt and to go a lot quicker into digital transformation initiatives, but that also brings some negatives that we need to learn to manage to get that work-life balance.
Yeah, on that note, I think we've got it's probably the right time as well to answer that question from Joseph. Thanks very much for that. It's basically a question on what are the major project control challenges in delivery of major infrastructure projects. I think that's another webinar in itself, to be honest. And how do you overcome this? Anyone want to start with this?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. Yeah, could be its own webinar. Let's see, which challenge would you like me to start with? I will take the question from a technical standpoint because coming from Hexagon as a software provider, these are the kind of challenges I'm faced with day in, day out. So the things that I see over and over again are disconnected information. So point solutions that are in place, but no central repository for information, no central decision-making system. You've got reporting difficulties where, due to this disconnected information, it takes a long time to produce reports. The reports don't get the kind of depth analysis that you really want. I see a lot of variances and lack of standardization. So just basically everyone's using Excel for their project controls processes, which everyone loves, but you can't standardize on best practice or really guide someone into what they should be doing there. So I can go on and on. I'll leave some time for the others to add in there, but those kind of challenges are some of the biggest ones that I see.
Maybe David, with your extensive experience across the years, maybe you want to share on, you know, in terms of how the project controls have changed, evolved the years, and what are the current challenges, and then we'll go on to Cameron, who is currently now doing the big delivery, and then we see whether it kind of tallies.
Yes, well, certainly. Well, project control, I think, used to be a whiteboard almost in a meeting room. You used to have the project room where everybody used to gather every few days and thrash out what the issues were. That's how we used to manage projects, I think. Certainly medium scale projects, not the very large ones, but it used to be very much people get together in the same space and discuss. And following on from what we were saying earlier, now that with the whole global working process, people tend to have their own processes in their own countries or their own domains. And speaking a little bit to what Jimmy was mentioning, nowadays sometimes drawing those together isn't perhaps quite so easy, and people are very wedded to their own processes, their own company processes internally, and sometimes bridging that gap, you need like a universal denominator that everybody can speak into, the same perhaps common system for managing the projects and drawing together the risks. That the way we approach them are still very, I wouldn't say silo, but very, the fact that people are working from different parts of the globe on projects now, much more than before, is perhaps exposing some of those differences as well. You know, before it would have been a more homogenous, similar mindset, similar approach, similar people, because you're all working from the same country largely. I think that's one of our larger challenges these days is getting that sort of common platform, perhaps, to agree and discuss the whole management of the project, especially a large one.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing the Birmingham New Street upgrade, it was tons and tons of A0 drawings in the meeting room where we started plotting out the charts for, the shifts of critical paths and things like that. But that was probably over 10 years ago now. So I think things have shifted quite a bit.
Exactly. We used to go around the room, all around the wall from door till you go back to the door again with the time chart and mark your way along it. Yeah, that was the war room. Yeah.
Definitely. Cameron, how have things changed now? And what are the typical challenges that you face?
Oh, look, project controls has its own set of issues. I mean, it's a subset of project management, but it's starting to gain prevalence like I've not seen. This is the 6th organisation in 15 years I've implemented a project control solution in. We've got a $16 billion project as part of an $80 billion portfolio, and trying to get standardization and common understanding of what project controls is, not only within a portfolio, within a state or city or within a country, let alone globally, is an interesting thing. There are multiple definitions. Every single project control solution I implement is different from the ones previously. And my approach is very much you've got to be flexible and you've got to suit whatever the organization's needs are at the time. Sometimes you'll have certain remits under your control, other times you won't. I know in the United States, they focus very heavily on cost and time. In Europe and Asia, there's a lot more focus on risk. In Australia, it's a bit of everything. So my approach really does focus on people, process and technology, and the challenges associated with that are capacity and capability in the workforce. In Australia at the moment, there's nearly $200 billion worth of work in civil infrastructure that's coming into fruition over the next few years. In Melbourne alone, well over $100 billion. So finding the right people with the right skill sets in the market, that's incredibly, it takes a huge amount of time to be able to build a team and maintain a team and continue to develop a team. Process and technology, similar to what David and Jimmy said. So every organization is different, and that's absolutely true. Understanding the core processes of project controls and what you need to do for the life cycle of a project is important. I typically take my own process that I've developed over many years for all of the project controls functions, and I seek to either engage technology that is fit for purpose for a particular organization, or you end up doing a bit of a makeshift hodgepodge, shall we say, of what an organization currently has and what you're able to bring in to complement that. But to Jimmy's point, typically Excel is used as a band-aid to cross bridges between most solutions. I've been a massive advocate in the last few years pushing software vendors for end-to-end solutions. A large amount of software vendors are certainly heading in that direction, but no one's really quite nailed it well, particularly with their involvement with the ERPs and so on. So, end-to-end software solutions, standardized common process, and obviously capacity and capability of the teams is incredibly, that's at the forefront of what you're thinking about when you're setting up project controls teams.
Yeah, for sure. How about in terms of when we talk about technology as well? Because I remember now we're all talking about working collaboratively, not using Excel, for example. How about using the technology like things like the IoT or the AIs, like what Jimmy mentioned earlier, or, in fact, people have been talking about building digital twins, which is the big buzzword at the moment. I know that probably the maturity of the digital twin is still a way to go yet, but I think it's kind of accelerated the 3D, 4D, and even now in certain countries we're talking about 6Ds. How does that help with this project control challenges that we've got as well?
Yeah, this is exactly what we do at Hexagon. So we help companies with their digital twin, 3D, 4D, 5D transformation journey. So I think if I just summarize, regardless of where you are in your own organization in terms of your maturity, what's clear is that everyone is trying to take that next step, and what the technology can do is it automates the boring, it eliminates the boring work, so it automates those kind of tasks so that you can then focus on the high value activities. So things that are automated are the collecting the data from the different systems through integration. That integration is so easy today to do. So we can connect to different tools, whether that's your ERP or engineering design tools, procurement tools, whatever the schedule, whatever you have in place, connect to those tools, bring all that in, so everything is bi-directionally talking to each other. So then you're not doing that stuff manually, because if you're using Excel, you're probably having to do this system work yourself. And then by the time you do that, there's no time to actually analyze the information. So you're really not getting good value out of the working hours. I saw recently a statistic from Gartner that said 80% by 2030, 80% of project management activities today will be eliminated. So what I take from that is it's not that project management or project controls in itself will be eliminated, but the work that we're going to be doing will be changing because of all of this leveraging the machine learning, artificial intelligence. All of this is coming into our projects, and it's going to change the way that we do work in the future.
I see David was chuckling a little bit there. I think you got something to add on.
Well, yes, I'm just thinking perhaps there's some benefits out of that. I think certainly these days we seem to spend more time talking about a project than actually doing it. And, you know, I'm not saying that's a negative thing to properly plan and prepare, but as an engineer, I find that we sort of spend 10 years planning a project, then we expect the contractors to come along and build it in 2 years. And there's a mad panic, there's a shortage of resources, there's 24-hour working, there's enormous pressure on the back end side to get the project built. Whereas if we spent less time actually sitting around talking about it, you know, and that's a bit of a strange view to take, but I know you have to consider the environmental aspects and all the whole part of going into a project. But if you can speed up that front end and leave more time for the actual site work, I'm sure we'd end up with a better quality project at the end of it, and less pressure on the limited resources available on the ground. So anything that Jimmy and his team or anybody else can do to automate some of those early stages, I think would be a great thing as an engineer, certainly.
Yeah, I think Cameron touched on it a little bit on the people aspect as well. So what I've realized in talking to some of the clients that I've got as well is there's a little bit of a mismatch in terms of the people's skills and understanding and what you can actually achieve via technology. Because I think what is important to note to everybody is that technology is there to help us to move things forward. It's not to be there to be the brain to activate certain things. And you know, you still need to think about how you want things done. You still need to think about what you're going to build. And then from that endpoint to then implement the technology and, you know, grow the skill sets in your people to be able to activate and to implement the 3D, the 4Ds, or to even to come up with a data lake for everybody as well. As engineers, I know that we like to collect a lot of data, and that's always been the issue. But collecting the data doesn't mean that you get a lot of information out of it. So I think that part of the understanding needs to come into play. Cameron, from your side, how has the skill sets and technology what's that level from what you understand at the moment in terms of people understanding how technology can help you?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with technology providers trying to warn them to not race ahead with these promise of silver bullet panaceas that then struggle to implement because they're not bringing the people who actually have to play with them along for the ride. So typically I find that skill levels are fairly low. Interesting analysis. In Victoria, a civil engineering degree is 4 years, 18 subjects. Only one of those is an introduction to project management, right? So, and there's a large amount of engineers who are not a member of Australian Institute of Project Management Institute. So there's a big knowledge gap, in my opinion, between project management skill sets and then where some of these young people come out of universities to work. Look, I'm not against Excel. I think Excel is a wonderful product, but to Jimmy's point, where we can find proprietary solutions to be able to minimize the use of Excel, also to automate where possible, all of those sort of things, exactly what I'm after and what I look for. You know, conversations, there's always buzzwords, you know, for years, and then earned value. Now it's all about AI, digital engineering, 4D, 5D, 6D. To implement something like that on a mega project over 10, $20 billion, the consideration around how you actually align your cost breakdown structure, work breakdown structure, asset structure, to be able to get anywhere near that is immensely complex. And there are a lot of very large organizations delivering projects all around the world that don't even get cost and time aligned. So we you know, as with anything in project management, the theory is very sound. The practice is something very different. So we need to take baby steps to getting people along for the ride. And the biggest push for things like BIM and digital engineering, in my perspective, has to come from the asset owners. The asset owners are the ones who receive the returned asset. They're the ones that need to be driving for what form they want that to be, whether it be 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D, or 6D. Once the asset owners start demanding this sort of approach and passing that on to the delivery agencies and the contractors, and you'll see a much better improvement. I find typically the contractors are not offering this stuff up any more than a little bit of face value at times. But if they were certainly pushed by the asset owners that that's what they had to do, you'd see a big advancement in that. So I think the technology is definitely getting ahead of the process and the skill set at this stage, and we've just got to be cognizant to bring everybody along for the journey.
It almost feels like in university we need to now combine the two courses of engineering plus technology together so that people are actually trained in both, so that they're not just selling one or the other, I think.
I'm a big advocate of breaking project controls out of project management as well, but that's my global domination on another day.
Go on, Jimmy.
I was going to say, I support that. I wanted to add a couple points to what Sybil brought up about the skill gap, where, yeah, if you look at the workforce data, you can see that it's an aging workforce. So what we have to do is we have to capture all of the knowledge from the more senior members of the workforce so that we can enable the juniors, the people that are coming out of school that don't have those kind of that experience or the education, the skill set that you would have with a lifetime of working on projects. So with technology, we're able to actually build that knowledge into the tool itself so that it's an intuitive way to move through the project. So you can actually take someone that's a junior level and skill them up overnight just by giving them a proper tool to do so. I actually have a personal experience relative to this, because before I was with Hexagon, I was working in project controls, and I didn't have the luxury of having this kind of system that I'm talking about today. And I remember one time that there was a cost analyst that had left the organization, went on to do something else, and the project was handed over to the next cost analyst. Someone took over, and because of all of the fancy Excel spreadsheets and macros, everything that was designed by this previous cost analyst, the new one was not able to decipher anything on that. So they weren't able to see what was happening on the project, what they even needed to do next. So what the company ended up having to do was bring back that previous person, hire that previous person back after hours to do a proper handover to this new person. And that is just a nightmare scenario if you're trying to run a seamless project. So what you can do is, if you feel like this is a risk in your organization of happening, what you can do is you can actually implement the technology today so that everyone on every project is familiar with the processes and the way things should be moving, so that you can move people around between projects much more easier. If someone wants to change roles or is no longer with the company, you can continue on with that project. And before I close that thought, I just want to add one observation is you might be thinking, well, it seems pretty valuable to be that person that designed their own Excel formulas. That it seemed like they were pretty valuable, pretty good job security in that. But I would actually challenge that person to be involved in the digital transformation and use that knowledge they have to enable the rest of the organization. And they're going to be actually even more valuable to that organization and help their career even further.
Yeah, so I was just going to come back to what Cameron's point a little bit earlier about the asset owner and the involvement in the project. And I think a lot of the amazing new technologies that we're bringing forward are being focused largely on the contractor side, the design side. And I think we're perhaps not bringing the asset owners along with us quickly enough to show them what they're going to be getting, in a sense. You know, so often the operator is the last person that gets involved in the project, perhaps. Sometimes a shadow operator will be involved at the project planning stage, but the real asset owner, who might have a lot of useful comments to make on what features he'd like to see or the benefits that can be built in at the early stage. I think we need to educate the asset owners as well as the design side, the consultant side, the construction team. It has to be that back end focus as well.
That is very true, because I realize as well that if the asset owners are unsure about what their outcome needs to be, then the process gets very, very gray and muddled along the way as well. And it varies. Now that David, you're in Malaysia as well, and Jimmy having experience in Singapore, I think in the region, if you move from Australia to Singapore to then the wider Southeast Asia as well, the maturity of asset owners are also very variant of what they expect and what they want. A lot of the time they want the top quality output, but they have no idea how to get there. And what they want is, I want what Europe is showing me. I want what America has done. Similar to like what I mentioned before about the digital twin. I want a digital twin of the station, for example. How do you go about doing it? I don't know. Just get it done for me. That kind of a conversation, I think that is almost a stop-start from the start of the planning solution. Maybe we move on to answering a bit of a question from Dexter. Traditionally, it's not uncommon for emerging economies to boost growth through infrastructure projects, very much so in Southeast Asian countries. But with COVID-19 pandemic still looming, do you see slowdown in infrastructure projects development in emerging economies? I think maybe to start off, whilst I let the three panelists have a think, is that from my personal experience is that I don't think it's slowed down. In fact, a lot of the government, a lot of the stakeholders are putting in a lot more investment, or trying to put in more investment so that they can actually boost the economy via the infrastructure projects growing. And also because of the fact that you are now able to, like this panel, touch base with people in Australia, with US, with Europe, all within a call. I think the expectation of the infrastructure project still ongoing is still very much there. I don't know, the panelists, do you have any thoughts? Anybody wants to say something?
I think you're right that there is, to me, I can see a big push to have shovel-ready projects as we come out of the COVID. So this is, again, speeding up the whole front end of the job. As we mentioned earlier, a bit of a theme in this is getting that whole project planning and everything in place and going quickly. So you've got projects ready to go. And certainly in Southeast Asia, I think there's going to be a focus on getting schemes going to spend the way out of the COVID issue. And this then comes back a little bit to Cam's point he mentioned about the availability of resources. And maybe Cam wants to enlarge on that a little bit, but I can see that as a real problem. Getting the people, the whole mobility of the workforce from country to country is still a major issue, and the availability within a country with all the processes to go through before you can even start on site these days are perhaps going to be a bit of a constriction on how it's going forward.
Yeah, I agree. Capacity and capability is the number one risk in any mega project globally now. So what we're seeing is all governments trying to build their way out of the COVID pandemic. And to David's point, for these shovel ready, which is a funny concept, shovel ready projects. And what we're seeing is massive commitments, far beyond the availability of the existing workforce in any country. And the other added pressures of COVID, obviously, are the ability to bring external resources in. And it's interesting. Prior to COVID, if you had certain areas in the world that were going through, a massive boom, and it might be they're preparing for a World Cup or an Olympics or something along those lines, you might be able to drag resources across. But where every country in the world is essentially on a massive civil infrastructure push, those resources become even more constrained. So, as I said, in Australia alone, we're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars worth of civil infrastructure, and it's hard to see daylight over the next 15 years, which in one sense is really positive that there's that sort of security in the market. But as I said, the number one risk is capacity and capability, and it's not just people to work in project teams, it's the supply chain, it's the raw materials themselves, absolutely everything. So we're seeing massive shortages, obviously globally in timber. We've got steel shortage issues. There's issues around concrete and so on. So the more and more projects that get brought on, the more that compounds that issue.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, in the US, there's a $2 trillion infrastructure package that's trying to get approved now. So and the question was about developing economies, but I think every country is making that investment, but the actual work itself, yeah, I agree with you, Cameron. And David, that's where it's going to be the pinch, is that the projects are going to be green light, ready to go, but the work itself might be slow to start just due to all these issues that you've already brought up.
I think the shortage of resources from materials is perhaps a bigger problem emerging than the shortage of labour, to be honest. I know we see labour as the more immediate one, but Cam's mentioned materials are going to become the biggest problem, I think, going forward. You can't even get materials for the current projects, never mind the ones going forward that are on the books. So I really think that's where the issues are going to be. Australia perhaps is not so bad. It's got a large area to gather from, but somewhere like Singapore, you have to bring in almost all your materials. And I can see that being a constraint on some of the very large projects that are still planned for transit in Singapore even.
Yeah, definitely. I think now we are almost on the needs basis now in terms of which projects are being supplied by the in terms of concrete or steel, based on how crucial this infrastructure project is to the whole economy of Singapore. So I think that's going to be the next push for how do we get things into Singapore, especially we are a small island city country. It's almost impossible to get people and all these materials into the country without actually opening up the borders. So obviously there are the issues in terms of opening the borders up as well. So that's a lot of the things that we have got to iron out. Actually, moving on to the project as well. Maybe in terms of, whilst we are talking about the future of infrastructure projects, in terms of actual infrastructure itself, have you guys seen any changes or any trends in terms of the types of transport infrastructure that are to be built, perhaps? The traditional either very deep tunnels or above ground stations, have they shifted along the way, and how has the planning shifted along the way in the last few years?
I think certainly as we build more in congested cities, we need to go deeper. If you look at the Cross London line that's being built, it has to go underneath everything else that's there before. And then above ground, we have to build above everything that's there. We're trying to put new LRT systems into existing congested cities to try and relieve some of the transport issues. And yeah, there's very limited footprints on where you can put columns, where you can route a railway system through an existing city. So I see that as more and more of a problem. And I think that we have to look at the question of, are we building for the right future? In a sense, how is COVID changing travel patterns? Some of the projects that we've been planning and talking about for the last 20 years, and perhaps are coming to shovel ready, are they still reflective of actual passenger flows? Do we need to cater so much for the commuting peak, or are we going to see much more people spreading their working hours across the day and working from home, obviously, more leisure travel, perhaps? So are we looking at a more balanced infrastructure utilization, looking at rail and road and that sort of thing, compared to before, where we were always looking at how we're going to serve the peak? Perhaps we need to more lop the peak, or if the system that COVID hasn't already done it for us. So I think we may be looking at a bit of a review of some of the projects that were going ahead, and certainly the ones that are in planning stage. Make sure we're building for the right future, not the future we thought we were when we started the project.
That's a great point. I wonder how many business cases are being reassessed to see if their benefits analysis still and their modelling still stacks up when you've got, I mean, we're seeing it here. I mean, the largest employer is the Victorian government, and they've changed their policy from a mandated 5-day to 3-day week. And there's a lot of flexible working around, to your point, David, around when you start, when you finish, how, you know, so that peak is going to really change. And it's interesting, you know, a large amount of projects that are already committed, part of a political agenda, very few get reassessed on that basis. But I mean, you know, perhaps some of them should.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because before the pandemic, there was a definite increase in urbanization and moving into the cities, but then now everything got shaken up where you don't really have to be in the city anymore. So you can go more remote. So it'll be interesting if those reassessments get done and the feasibility is really changes at all based on these factors.
Yeah, that's a great point. In Australia, we've seen a mass exodus of the major cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, to people going out into rural areas. So what that will do is that'll force a change in what it is, the infrastructure we need to upgrade. So it's no longer just so much major city base. It's these rural areas are going to need, you know, upgraded train lines and roads and so on. So yeah, there's been a significant exodus from the city.
Yeah, and I remembered that, well, a few years ago when we first trialed the on-demand, you know, the transport network in Singapore, people were going, nah, it's not going to work because we've got so many people traveling at all sorts of hours. How can you make that on-demand work on, you know, in transport cities like in such a heavily populated country like Singapore? But I think now, because like what you guys are saying in terms of people are working at home more, people go out at different times just to stagger it so that I keep my safe distancing from other people. The on-demand button somehow seems to work better now, and it seems a more realistic way of supplying for the general public. And how has the green agenda shifted since you know, the last 5 years, say, from what we were used to? When I say the green agenda, it's not just the, you know, looking at the sustainability, the monitoring of the plants, the trees, and the birds, but more on as the overall. We're talking about sustainable energy as well to run the network, and also about how do you actually use even the trains in some countries, they put the PV on top of the train so that they can generate some sort of renewable energy. Has that come into place in any of your projects so far?
Oh, certainly. Projects that WSP, so like all of the consultancies, is having a major focus on net zero decarbonisation of building materials, structures going forward. Some of the railway sidings that we're building now, we're putting a roof on just so we can put solar cells on top of the roof to harness the solar energy, whereas before we wouldn't have put a roof on those sidings. So there's changes like that. And another project we're involved in Canada on the government building, where we're sort of taking the heat from below ground, where we need to cool, and the levels underground, and we're using that heat then to heat the building above ground where it's cold. So we're balancing out energy use across the site, whereas before we would have had all the cooling towers outside throwing the heat away. now that heat is sort of recycled through the system, and a lot of underground geothermal storage loops being built into the site. So yeah, it's just a major change really in how you use the energy within a site and how you use that site overall is one of the big focus. And there's a electrification of the railways mentioned, a question there, I think just coming in. I think there's been a push for electrification for a long while. It's been stuttering in some countries. Some countries have got it quite well organized on a rolling program. Some are a boom and bust, and UK is one of those where we don't do anything for 10 years, then we suddenly panic and want to electrify hundreds of kilometers, and we say, where's all the contractors gone? And that then, at least if you use electricity, you've got a choice of sources, haven't you? So you can use the wind, you can use electricity piped over from France, or you can use whatever you want. And that, I think, is having that flexibility is one of the benefits going forward. So it's a whole another webinar on net zero decarbonisation, but it is a focus of projects, and I'm sure it's going to be a larger component going forward. I think it also, you bring that into the life cycle costing as well. Some of the work or some of the products, materials may be more expensive at the beginning stage of the project, but if you look at the life cycle costs, they come out as a cost neutral. And on the project control side, how you convince the owner of that aspect is perhaps a whole nother topic.
Indeed, I think that point that you brought up, David, is pretty relevant, because as as we bring the project life cycle into play as well, the whole cost of how things are to implement is probably not so much of the big issue anymore. Now it's how much does it cost to run this whole network, or how much does it cost to look at the maintenance costs as an overall. Because we've always got clients in one of my projects as well that they ask, right, so you say that this energy renewables we can sell it back to the grid, but how do we do that? Which country has done it, and can you show us some use cases? And as construction projects go in the world, you probably can't put up any real life cases until maybe 2-3 years after it's been implemented, because of the way that how energy recycling works well. So I think what's interesting is now that the way that we used to work as silos of transport sector, energy sector, power and energy sector, now is all coming back to this is whole infrastructure network. We need to learn how to make it a workable city or workable state, for example, and how do we then allocate different resource right at the start to build this correctly as an infrastructure asset for the asset owners eventually. There's a question that's popped in now: renewal as against new works projects under COVID-19. How do asset owners balance the resource allocation? On surface, renewal seems a better choice as lesser disruption on humans and more efficiency on cost, as long as shutdown is highly permitted. Interesting question. Cameron, do you want to take this on first?
Yeah, it depends on the asset and the infrastructure. So it's a combination of both, right? So a large amount of projects can be renewal, and others can be brand new. So I think that you'll find that both are adopted. So major freeways. Look at the M25 in London, for instance. I mean, by the time they've gone around and resurfaced and played around with it, they're starting again. So I mean, all over the world, you'll find there is a balance for asset owners of renewal and of a new capital investment or new infrastructure. So I think you'll probably find there's more renewal than there is new at times, because obviously the more that you build, the more that you've got to maintain and you've got to continually upgrade. So it just depends. There's positives and negatives for both. So yeah, I think you do find there's a fair balance of both going on all over the place.
I think what's also important is to balance out in terms of what you understand as how much you would take to do renewal and how much you would take to do, a complete new work. Because a lot of times the maintenance, the renewals are actually costing a lot more, mainly because, when it was built 30, 40 years ago, people don't really think about how much it costs to renew certain things. And if it's a 30, 40-year-old asset, then it will probably at a point where you do need to renew it. So there's always a bit of a balance. And also going back to the asset owner stakeholders, they need to understand that there's a balance there as well, and not to push everything on the operators or push everything on the asset builders as well. David, Jimmy, do you have anything to add on renewal?
I was going to say that renewal, or if you like, working on existing assets is tremendously disruptive. As you know, trying to work on existing railway to electrify it, to upgrade it, is not only hard work for the contractors with the limited availability of working hours, but it's very disruptive to the travellers as well, who are always subject to new timetables, changes, etc., unreliability of new systems. So I think there's a benefit in building new if you can. But of course, if you look in UK, for example, with the whole High Speed 2 argument, do you build a new railway, or do you try and spend the same amount of money upgrading the existing railway? And at the moment, the new railway argument is winning, because the existing railway is largely full. Even though I'm not quite sure post-COVID if it's still going to be as full as we talked earlier. But I think people underestimate the disruption caused in trying to work on existing assets from the passenger or the user viewpoint, which is who we're doing it for in the end. It's not a railway for the engineers to work on. It's a railway for passengers to use, if we're talking about railways specifically, and the same for roads. So I think it's underestimated the impact of renewal, and often you need to go for new, and then we start the whole argument about the NIMBY. If there's another webinar topic there on building a new system. I'm sure Cam's got a similar problem trying to build a new railway. The time and effort you spent deciding whether you can go round a tree or pull the tree up and move it, is disproportionate, I think, to the benefits gained in the end, to be honest.
Yeah, our project went through nearly 3 years of development and approval. So from business case in 2017 through to getting all of your approvals, it took nearly 3 years. And the environmental and sustainability requirements from government are extensive, and that all gets transitioned into the project. But the reality is projects are immensely expensive these days. Okay, so 25 years ago, if I was working on $1 million project, I think, wow, now all the projects seem to be $10-20 billion. They're all, the costs of these things are huge, and their entire industries on their own. And then obviously to David's point, the disruption around renewals is quite significant as well. So it's a fine balance that every asset owner has to wrestle with. They have certain budget for renewal, certain budget for new capital works, and then you've got that. How do we keep the satisfaction of the user, whether it be road or rail, and how do we keep that all positive as well? So it's always a constant challenge.
The funny part is it comes back down to how much information, how much data you've got to be able to analyze which one is better. Because when we talk about renewal as well, how do we know, or how do we ascertain which asset to renew first, and which one is probably a bit okay to hang on for a little bit longer? So in terms of a network, which is the part that requires a lot more maintenance, maybe it's higher trafficked areas, or where there are a lot more depots, for example, maybe that area needs to be renewed a lot quicker as opposed to the 50-year design or 40-year design. And then you look at, when you look at the suburbs, maybe they don't need to be renewed that quickly. However, they do need to be of a certain level of quality so that you still have your new trains running through them or your new roads running through them. I think that's always a little bit of it comes back down to data collection, how good your understanding of your asset and your network is. We've got 10 more, I think less than 10 minutes now before the end. I know that we could probably carry on for another hour or so, but perhaps I could invite you guys, if there are any burning questions, please do put it into the Q&A at the moment. And then maybe I can invite each of the panelists to have the last, the last few words or points on what are the what is the new norm that you see working in the next 5 years in the infrastructure industry or in the transport infrastructure industry? David, do you want to start?
Well, I think it's summarizing some of the points we've been making, that the new norm is working globally from home, effectively, pooling resources, using common platforms, perhaps, as I said, for modeling, for project control, and also dealing with, say, the availability of people and materials. Those things are going to drive the way we plan and go forward. And I think there's going to be more of a perhaps government control or management of which projects go first. A lot of projects are government funded already, of course. And so, in case, instead of doing 2 or 3 all at the same time, you might end up having to pick your priorities, which one you're going to use the available resources on to achieve the best end result, rather than just to say get everything going at once, and then everything stutters to a halt because of we can't keep it going. So I think that's going to be maybe the focus, and say just the whole renewal, as mentioned, that interesting question that came up: do we renew or build new? A lot of, if we're going to be repurposing city centres, do shopping centres now become housing areas again because nobody goes shopping anymore? You know, and if they're not going shopping anymore, do we need the railways to get them to the shops? You know, I think that there's a whole reset of thinking, perhaps. It's a bit glib to say it, but that whole thing is going to start us again, and where we've been going on a certain route. Is that still, as I mentioned earlier, is that still the right future that we're building for?
Very true. Cameron?
Yeah, I think everybody needs to take a little bit of a breath and relax. You know, it's yeah, what's currently occurring at the moment and what's in the pipeline to occur. I mean, these are things that you know, a large amount of them are sort of set into process. But to David's point, we need to spend a little bit of time, whether that's a year or two, trying to understand what this new normal does look like and what the long-term effects of what those requirements could be. I mean, you know, just in what I've seen in my little world down here, as I said, there's been a massive exodus of people living in major capital cities out into the country. We've seen, you know, proof that for nearly 2 years we're able, as an industry, to work remotely and work from your own home. So that, you know, the requirement for office buildings and all of that sort of stuff in the city needs to be revisited. Yeah, I think this is going to, the effect of the pandemic is going to go on for a little bit longer, and we're going to need to take a bit more time to understand what those long-term impacts will be, and whether there is an appetite to go back to what the original or the previous normal was, or do we take the best of what we're seeing here? You know, I know that a lot of people are really loving the added flexibility of not having to go into an office all of the time. Yeah, the technology is obviously providing the ability for anybody to work from anywhere. So I think that there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before we really get a feel for what's going to happen here.
Thanks, Cameron. Jimmy?
Yeah, I think with basically everything that we've discussed, the technology is going to help us continue to be more efficient in executing these projects. We're going to be able to run more predictable projects, so less surprises by getting higher quality data and more visibility into the data that you already have. You'll be able to get these early warning indicators and insights so that you will eliminate those surprises and essentially run more predictable projects. So that will be nice, and just be more control over the projects that you have. So just a better ability to standardize on best practices and enable the workforce.
Thank you, Jimmy. Predictable contracts and projects. I don't think that ever happens, right? Right. So from my point of view, thank you very much. And I have got a final take home is, I think we all touched on the people, the data, and the stakeholder and asset owners. What for me is important is that, you know, that the three has to be almost as a circle, and they have to start talking to each other better. Gone are the days when we have got asset owners, stakeholders being, sitting in their throne somewhere, and then the delivery guys, like the contractors and designers, just working their way through what their thought process are. I think it needs to be a more holistic way of working now. And through that, if we can use technology and building the capacity building and people skill sets to uplift what is going to be the outcome, I think that will be very, very positive in this industry going forward. I think on that note, thank you very much. If there's any other questions, please send it through quickly, because we've got a couple of minutes before we will log off. If not, thank you, Cameron, thank you, David, and thank you, Jimmy, for your time. Bastian, I'll hand this over back to you.
Thank you so much, Sybil, for moderating the discussion. And of course, Jimmy, David, and Cameron for sharing your insights. I think they've proven very valuable for the attendees. Many thanks, of course, also to our viewers. If you want to get connected with the speakers, or if you have any more burning questions, as Sybil mentioned, please feel free to connect with them on LinkedIn. And also, of course, a big thanks to our partner Hexagon for making this webinar possible. If you tuned in later than the start, or if you want to rewatch it, don't worry. The entire webinar will be made available on demand on the Asia Pacific Rail website. With that, thank you everybody so much again. Stay safe, everybody, and have a good afternoon ahead.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.